Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn here from the camera store, and I'm your host tonight, live from the camera store. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have wildlife and action photography chasing decisive moments with Jacquie Matechuk. And this event is sponsored by Canon Canada. So if you registered, we will be sending you an email with some special offers that we can't list online. But if you did not register for this event and you want to take part in those Canon Canada offers, please email me at evelyn@thecamerastore.com and I will add you to the list and make sure that you receive those special offers directly. There's also a bunch of work that's happening behind the scenes to make this happen. Hopefully everything will go off without a hitch, and that's thanks to our TCSTV Live Dream team. Tonight we have Drew, Jeff, Gary, and Riley working behind the scenes. And part of what I like most about doing these live events is being able to interact with all of you. I see we have people from all over the place. We have Calgary, British Columbia, Victoria. We have people that are from Australia. And so keep those comments coming. Let us know what you think as things are going on, and ask those questions too. And if you're not logged into YouTube, you also have the option to email me throughout the presentation, and I'll make sure we get to those as well. Again, my email address is evelyn@thecamerastore.com. And we'll make sure that we get to as many questions as we can throughout, as well as during the Q&A at the end. And if you're not already familiar with our guest tonight, we have a very special person here. It's Jacquie Matechuk, and she's an award-winning photojournalist and sports photographer with 7 national accreditations under her belt. She has a passion for chasing decisive moments, from the dirt in the grounds at the center of her hometown rodeo arena to the peaks of Aspen in the Winter X Games. And so welcome to the camera store, Jacquie.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. It is such a treat to be here.
Yeah, and I should also mention one last thing, that we do have Russell Brown from Canon Canada in the chat tonight. And so, hey Russ, thanks for joining us. So if you guys have any questions specific to Canon Canada, feel free to ask in the chat as well. But Jacquie, why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit about yourself?
You bet. So for a lot of people who may not know anything about me, who I am, where I came from, I do want to share a little bit about my story and why I do the things I do and how. So basically, I'm a local photographer, professional photographer from Cochrane, Alberta. I have been doing this for many, many years, but I did put a pause on my photographic journey for a pretty good spell, and I'll go through that really quick. But before I get started, I just want to ask everyone, as a bit of a disclaimer, here tonight I'm just going to share my journey, the things I've been through, the things I found that helped, and I'm hoping some of those things will help you too. So if along the way I say something you don't agree with, it's not really your cup of tea, that's okay. You know, we all come from different places, we have different styles. Just use the shopping cart theory. If you like what I say, throw it in the cart. If you don't, just keep going. Hopefully I'll get back on track and we can sync up again. So with that, I'll get started. So very briefly, just to touch base so you know a little bit about who I am, where I've come from, that journey, the inspiration. So back in the late 20s, my late 20s, I was actually part of the Canadian factory road racing team for Suzuki. So I actually had a position with them where I was doing timing and fuel calculations, handling VIP areas, and it was the most amazing sport to be part of. There were such incredible highs and lows, spectacular action. People were invested financially, emotionally. It was just electric, and I loved everything about it. What ended up happening with our particular team is we progressed quite well. We grew quickly, and before I knew it, I had some responsibilities taken off my plate, which actually gave me spare time when I was at the track. And one of the things I loved about the racing was all these beautiful images that were coming out. So started getting really good advice from some of the local photographers there, and I'm sure he's not listening and maybe we'll never see it, but Rob O'Brien from out east in Canada, if you're here, thank you, my friend. I appreciate all the support you gave me way back, and the good advice, and I still use it today and still pass on those words. So basically for me, the beginning started with being at the track and trying to share the parts of the story that I was getting that other people weren't. For the most part, fans would show up, they'd be there for a couple hours, see the action, love it, get their signature, and they're gone. And they miss everything that makes it so meaningful for the people that are putting their lives on the line to cross that finish line first. The sponsors, the crews, the mechanics, the riders. There's such a big story going on in the background. And having an opportunity to grab a camera and being in the places I was, I started to really explore that. So while there were a lot of images of the motorcycles racing across the finish line, a lot of my images were more about the teams and the interactions and the stories. And it started to bring a connectivity between the race fans and the people involved in the sport. And for myself, it was very rewarding. Obviously, I enjoyed it, but it ended up turning the heads of our team Suzuki, as well as the Yamaha factory team. And before I knew it, I was getting more and more requests. So it all started with that wonderful little camera, the Canon Rebel XT, back in 2005. Best advice I ever got, I think, from Rob was to invest in the best lens and glass I could possibly invest in. So that's what I did. In 2006, I bumped myself up to an L series EF 70-200. And from there, that year, I actually started to get some images published. So it was quite a fun jump into that world. And before I knew it, though, we hit a gap. My husband, who was actually racing at the time as well, was looking at his retirement. And my son, who had joined the race team, or one of the race teams, was just sort of climbing up into the pro ranks. So we ended up stepping away. Once he retired, I ended up with a full-time normal job and put the camera down. And ironically, I mean, that's back in 2009, and it wasn't until probably 6 years later, about 2016, 17, that I even picked the camera up again. And it all actually happened because the X Games announced that they were adding a new event called Snowbike to the series. And this was something that my son had done the year before and was very passionate about. So as soon as he ended up on the seat of one of these snow bikes, I realized that there was no material for him to go out and get sponsorship. It was such a new sport and nobody knew anything about it. There was nowhere to get photos because there hadn't been much for racing yet. So when X Games had announced this, that was the task. I had to find a way to get there and get some imagery out of that event. When we got there, though, things changed pretty rapidly. He came out of that first year with a podium finish. And as glad as I was that I got all those images and we were able to start turning around and turning it into real strong sponsorship for him to take this to another level, I did not realize how much it had roped me back into the world of photography. And I was hooked, hook, line, and sinker, 100%. So enter the reboot. Heard back from Yamaha after that podium finish. They were very excited to start marketing, and there was no material. You can't just find images from X Games on, online or available because everything's run by ESPN. So it's not like there's press people there. There is no access. So fortunately, with Yamaha's contact, I was able to get in a little bit deeper into the X Games, start exploring a little bit more with the paddocks and the story behind the scenes. And before you knew it, we had a lot more content and we were turning heads with that. He was picking up sponsorship. And then the kid went and turned around and decided to go gold that year. So moments like this, where he's literally just dropped the bike. One of the X Games crew ran up, draped the gold medal around his head. The TV guy pulled away. He turned around with his hands in his hair, like complete disbelief that he did it. And so for me, I was capturing that at the time as a photographer, but I look back now as a mom and think, wow, I'm so lucky that I got to do that. So pretty thankful. Spent the rest of the weekend learning other events. I was back behind the camera and watching all the snowmobile freestyle, snowboarding, big air, the half pipe, you name it. I was out getting some miles on that camera. So basically I shoot every day now, pushing myself all the time to new levels, different challenges. I've got friends back in my hometown. Wendy and Joanne, we go out everywhere together, and it doesn't matter if it's a bluebird for a day on a fence post, wild horses, or up to the Yukon. We're traveling together, we're sharing all of these experiences, and it just takes everything to the next level. So from where we left off with the racing to where I am now, I've got just a quick little video I'll start up here if it's okay, and it'll kind of give you a little snapshot of how I've progressed from where we were to where we are today. Or we won't, because we're having technical difficulties. Let me see. I will see if I can get that up and running in a minute. Do you need to restart? That's the next one.
Too far.
Yeah. Right there.
Keep going forward.
No. Okay, well, I guess we'll just maybe skip the video for now, so we're not able to get that running at the moment, but
That's what it should be.
yeah, maybe we'll just keep going.
that's okay.
Just a reminder, if you guys have questions, do please put them in the chat as we go
Find it
through
later.
the presentation.
Is that
If
the
you have
video?
questions about wildlife photography or any of the action stuff that we're going through, that'd be great. So, yeah, so do you want to just continue without the videos now? Sorry, Jackie.
Yeah, no worries. So basically what I'm going to go into tonight, I want to try and break things down in two parts. So first I want to talk about the move to mirrorless. Prior to getting into the R5, the last DSLR I had was the 5D Mark IV. So I'm going to talk about that transition and what I noticed, the biggest differences, where I saw the value. And then I'm also going to take the second part and talk about preparing for the moment. So the moments that I chase, how do I get to them? How am I spotting them ahead of time? Is there things I can do to mitigate the risks involved with really difficult shooting scenarios? Those are the things I want to kind of touch base on tonight, and hopefully there'll be some really good advice in there that people can take and apply to their photography. So with the move to mirrorless, again, I was 5D Mark IV, went into the R5, and I was quite excited. I actually, first time I picked one up was at a road show with the camera store. So had come out and gave the camera and a couple of lenses a try, and was really impressed with what it felt like and what it was doing. And that ended up taking me to the sold status and getting the camera into my hands. So some of the things, sort of my top few that I want to talk about tonight, one of them is the EVF. A lot of people talk about these electronic viewfinders, and that there's an advantage and disadvantage, and I agree with that. But what I thought was really impressive with these electronic viewfinders is the amount of information that you have at your fingertips. So when you've got the camera up and you're trying to look at a scenario, a certain scene, and you're composing it just right and you're snapping shots off, sometimes you only have those few split seconds where something's landed or a crash is taking place, or it's the start of a race. And you take those pictures and then you stop, you look at the back of the camera and go, no, they're all too dark, or they're just a little soft. And when you have the electronic viewfinder, you see the picture as it's going to be finished once it processes through the actual sensors. So if it's too dark, if it's not if your aperture is not adjusted properly, whatever it is, when you lift that camera up, you see exactly what you have. So now it's starting to coach you on how to work that triangle, the exposure and aperture and ISO. And it's almost like having literally a tutor with you the whole time you're taking shots. You pick it up, it's like, whoa, 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 no, don't pull the trigger, take a look. And it's constantly reminding you. So as someone that used a lot of shutter priority settings, not a ton of manual because of the type of photography I did, I found this really took my skill sets to another level, and things that were reactive started to become instinctive. It was that much faster because I was really understanding the camera. With low light scenarios, though, having that viewfinder, it could find the most difficult low light targets. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. So if you're a night photographer, you're gonna love the fact that you can spot a star a million miles away, couple little taps of the magnifier and pinpoint sharpness, and then do your job from there. So a lot of little details when it came to low light photography that was incredibly impressive to me, and that viewfinder really helped. So the next thing is the dual pixel CMOS sensors. So the sensors on this provided new types of tracking that had not been available before. Being able to lock in on that target and follow it, whether it was through snow, whether it was in dirt, in the air, if it was backlit, it didn't matter. There were so many circumstances where you would struggle in the past to try and follow your target, and this camera was just eating them up. It was having no issues at all, keeping me where I needed to be, which makes me a better photographer because I'm not in and out of the moment. I'm just really locked in and focused on what my subject's doing. At 20 frames per second, the images were coming off so fast, so high resolution. It was just a completely different ballgame for me. So instead of having several images to choose from, I would have a lot of images to choose from in just a couple seconds of shooting. And it made for an elevated experience, not just for me as a photographer, but certainly for the clients looking at the images.
We actually have a couple of questions from the audience here. So the Grumpy Canadian wants to know, what lens body combo would you have if you could only go with one each? And as a follow-up, this is for an entire day where you don't know what you're going to encounter.
I would probably be on the R5 with a 70-200. You have no idea what you're shooting, so that's a good point. I do like to have the flexibility of zooming in and out of different subject matter, but regardless of what you come up against, it's up to you as a creator to really compose the image properly. So sometimes I might be out photographing wildlife and I have a 600 lens, and the wildlife comes much closer than my 600 lens needs them to come. So that means I need to shift gears. I can't just get up and run away. I need to figure out something else to shoot. So now it's going to be about the details. It might be about the claws on a bear. It might be about the eyelashes on an eagle. Whatever it happens to be, you just shift gears, you pivot. And I mean, if this last couple of years has taught us anything, it's that we need to be able to do that. So that's probably the ones I would go with.
Awesome.
So taking a look again just at how this camera responds. With most of these images, I'm going to try and put the settings on there, so if there are questions about those after, you can bring them up. I don't have anything to hide at all, and I'm really happy if this helps someone down the road making decisions. So this particular one was actually from one of our more recent trips, and this is shot with the Canon R5. I have a 600 lens, but I'm actually shooting this image in a Zodiac with 6 other long lenses and 2 other people, roughly 8 backpacks and dry bags, and on the water. So a lot of things going on at one time, a lot of movement to contend with. It's pouring rain, so it was getting dark, it was cloudy. But these are some of the things that you have to work with when you want to catch these moments, is getting yourself in a position to be ahead of the action before it unfolds. So again, looking at what these cameras can do, the ability to shift on the fly and recognize right away, looking in that viewfinder, what I need, that's sort of next level. In sports, same thing happens. You know, shooting, in this case, this is with the R3, was part of our launch, and the RF 70-200. So really low light. This is a setting sun just leaking through the trees in the background. Our talent, our athlete in this case, Brendan Howie, fantastic on a bike, really wanted to wear black. Not easy as a photographer shooting against dark trees to be able to isolate a dark clothed athlete. So kudos to him for putting out the challenge, and certainly to the R3 for stepping up and making it happen. So shutter speed at 1/2000th. The aperture was at 4.6. I could go wider down, so the 2.8 would have been an option, but I would have run a lot of risk in losing some detail from the bike. And typically with a sports shot, you need those logos, you need those brands on there to sell. So next, I'm going to talk really quick about the low light performance of this camera. So with a lot of the conditions that I shoot in, if it's winter sports, a lot of those sports we have anything but low light. It's tons of bright light, and in fact, many times I'm going to be stopping down on the exposure. However, with wildlife and certain, setting sun scenarios, you're going to come across a lot of dark. So this particular camera is exceptional at how it handles those low light situations. With this image in particular, we had, again, pouring rain coming down. We were shooting, it was probably midday, but it was really overcast. But I'm trying to catch an action shot. So knowing that he was bouncing back and forth and looked like he was on the pounce for something very particular, I knew I was going to have to switch up my speed. When he was walking and sitting on the log, I was fine at a shutter speed of 1/320th or 1/250th. But as soon as he looked like he found something in that water, he made a couple of shifts, and it's like, oh no, he's going to go. So bam, up goes the shutter speed to the 1/1000th, and he leaps off of this log into the water. It pushed the ISO all the way up to 12,800. That's tough for a camera to do. That tells you about the lighting conditions, but really happy with what performed as far as the image goes.
There's a really good question here about ISO from Mary Engel about, do you ever float your ISO using auto for that feature, or are you always making that choice?
You know what, I've listened to so many, especially sports photographers, that talk about shooting full manual and setting all those things up. I don't usually have that luxury, because with the way I shoot, a lot of times I'm in the middle of a track. So 1 second I'm shooting backlit, I'm following him around, all of a sudden he's got, deep dark forest behind him, then he's all blown out with nothing but sky. Then he's up in the air and back down on the ground and into a berm. So I have got light changing all the time. And in those situations, no, I would leave it on auto, and I would set my maximum and to 12,800 or 6,400 depending on the session, so that it's not always the thing I'm losing control over. Always keep your shutter speed though in control, and we'll talk more about that too.
Awesome. And actually, we have one more question from Rob Verdun, who has a couple of questions here.
Okay.
Do you have a network of people that you that share where the animals have been seen? And also wondering if you work with guides to find wildlife.
Oh, great questions. Thank you. Absolutely rely on guides when you're going out, especially if you're shooting larger and apex type predators. It's really hard to know the places that you're traveling, all the little nuances. We look at how our grizzly bears act here, or our black bears act here in Alberta. Our last trip, we had gone with Outer Shores Expeditions. What was so wonderful about this group is that they were not only environmentally and ethically responsible when it came to the lands and the wildlife, but the guiding that we had gave us a lot of history about the animals, about the places. We learned a lot about how they behave. So when we were out there, the behavior was nothing like it is in Alberta. If you saw a bear, there were circumstances where we were in really close proximity, not because we went there, but because the bears kept coming towards us. we were not a threat to them. They had no issues whatsoever about us being there. But it's having those experts keeping you safe that made the difference. So, when we have traveled up to, and at the end, I'm going to make sure that I have my email address up. So if there are people looking for certain expeditions or adventures they want to go on, whether it's polar bears or grizzly bears or eagles, reach out to me, because I've got just phenomenal contacts that I've been able to make, people that I would absolutely go out with again in a heartbeat as far as guides. And that's the only way to do it if you want to be safe and effective as a photographer.
Did you want me to put your email address in the chat?
Sure, yeah, we could do that.
Okay, it has your URL obviously as well.
Perfect.
So we'll pop that in there.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, and what was the other question that?
The other question was just to follow up if there was guides that you work with.
Okay.
But why don't we get to another one
Sure.
here? Actually, it was a comment from Scott saying, of course, with the R5, you could almost go with a wider angle zoom lens, like the 24 to 70, because you have the cropping ability.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we can get into a little bit later too, is just, how important is having high resolution for doing wildlife photography?
Definitely. And again, knowing the situations that you're going into, and we're going to talk about that in the second part, just where it's more about preparing for these moments and the things you need to be aware of so that you can capitalize and maximize on the opportunities that come out. So
sounds good.
Excellent.
Well, we'll get back to some more of your images
Okay.
and points here, but keep those questions coming. There's a lot of really great ones in the chat, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you don't hit your question now, keep in mind that I am saving some for a little bit later too.
Perfect. Thanks, Evelyn. Okay, so here, a moment from the X Games. So again, this is now one of my older professional camera bodies. This is a 1DX Mark II. Now this is a 100 to 400 lens, so none of the new technology here, but I'm using this just to show the capabilities of even the older series of bodied cameras as well as lenses, and how great they are at catching action. This is a night shot. It looks very odd, but basically in the freestyle event at X Games, they have a big snow mound right in the middle, and these competitors come launching off from different directions doing these incredible big air tricks, and you never know for sure which way they're going to come from, and there's only a couple of lights shining in on them. So with the old camera technology, unless the rider and the machine was really light, these were very difficult images to come out with that were clean and actually looked good, when they're blown up. I cannot wait to get the R5 back there with the new lenses. I haven't had the option because the motorized portion of X Games has been on pause since COVID started. So I'm very excited to see how many more challenges I'm going to be able to get through with the new mirrorless system compared to the older system. Very excited to try that. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the dual back button focus. I know everybody has their own techniques, so again, we're going to come back to that shopping cart theory, but for me, having done so much work previously with the 5D Mark IV, I was really relying a lot on my spot focus, and I don't do the crosshairs or the little group of 9. It was always spot focus, and I learned how to track my subjects very effectively because of that. Once this camera came out with eye tracking, spoiler, that made things so much easier as a photographer. So I ended up setting it up on the back, and I know it's pretty common now, but one of my buttons will do the eye tracking, the other one will be spot focus, because you're going to get into situations, and I'll show you a couple of images where there's good examples of where you're stressing the camera system a little bit too much, and you're not going to get the kind of response from it that you're expecting. So here on one of our most recent trips out to BC, of course we were very fortunate to come across a spirit bear while we were out there. This particular fellow was working his way down the riverbanks, and it was pouring rain. We sat there for 8 hours waiting, hoping that we would come across one. When he did pop out, he popped out in between these little trees. Now, the problem with that is that it's a very little it's a dark nook, and there's very little access around that for him to come out. So to try and get my camera to find him, it was jumping all over the place. One quick move with the thumb and you've got spot focus, and you're dialed into exactly where the camera wants to do its job, and it did it beautifully. So there are points where that technology will get you so far, and then you need to take the steering wheel back and do it yourself. But it was really impressive to see how it performed with these low light conditions, because it was challenging. Same thing with situations like this with action when you're shooting rodeo. So this particular situation, this fella's come off of a horse, he's steer wrestling, so he's got his arms around, he's got his boots dug in, the steer's stirring dust, the cowboy's stirring dust, all that dust comes up and around, and all of a sudden, if you're doing tracking, now it's got all these distractions, and it's going to make it harder and harder for it to keep focused on the target. During that, the guy's moving and twisting and pulling the steer around. So again, another situation where being able to back button and jump into forcing it to lock on to what was most important, which for me was the cowboy, to his face, that's how it responded, and that's how I got the image. So it's, again, you've got some limitations you need to understand with the equipment, and that just comes with a lot of time, a lot of playing around and prep. But that back button, double back button focus, if you haven't tried it, it's not going to be comfortable, but I really recommend doing it, because this type of photography benefits so much from having that option. And last thing on the mirrorless camera I want to talk about is the shutter mode options. So again, using the eye tracking is such a step up for action photographers. Obviously you can't do it in every single situation, but it's amazing to me how accurate the R5 was. If you were to put your subject right against the background and there's just not a lot of separation there, that's usually where you'd see it start to struggle a little bit more, because it's just having a harder time picking it out. But if you can line yourself up and you've got a nice soft background, a decent bokeh, and you've got a nice clean subject, it's going to follow it until you can't hold the button any longer. It's amazing. The R3 takes it to the next level and will find it in even tougher conditions. So it was really neat to run those cameras back and forth. In this particular image, again, pouring rain. This was probably the heaviest it came down the entire time we were out there. And typically, if I am shooting wildlife or sports, wildlife, I'm minimum 1/1000th of a shutter, and sports is pretty much 1/1600, you know, if I can. Sometimes you've got to make concessions. This particular image was one of those moments where, you know, for an artistic flair, I pulled my shutter speed down because the bears weren't moving much, but by pulling them down to 1/320th of a second, I was actually able to catch movement in the raindrops, which kind of gave it that moody look and told that story of, wow, that's really coming down. So those are creative decisions you can make once you understand all the settings and the limitations and the strengths of your camera.
We just had a... Yeah, YouTube's going to crud. Why is it? Yeah. Yeah, YouTube's gone to crap for some reason.
Okay.
is it? Oh. It's popping up on there, but it's still not popping up on OBS. You're back.
And we're back. Sorry guys for the technical hiccup, but yes, we're back on. Thanks for your patience for all of you that have stayed on, but I'm going to pass back over to Jackie and we'll get right back into things. So thanks again.
You bet, and thank you guys for getting us up and running. Okay, so just again talking about not being afraid to have your speedy shutter going, even though this particular image was a little bit slower. Understanding what your settings are doing so you can have some creative control is really important. And again, it just comes with a ton of time. So this particular image, this is more of my old stomping grounds. A lot of images in the snow, a lot of challenges with combating blowouts for your images. This is actually done with the 5D Mark IV again, a 100-400. So for my old school DSLRs out there, amazing camera, as you can see. Shutter speed 1/3200th of a second, aperture 5.6, so that for me and for these images, the big focus I had was actually trying to pick up on all the logos for the sponsors. That's what sells for our manufacturers and for our racers. So I'm focused right now in this image right on the helmet where the decal is, and with the 5.6 I've got enough depth all the way down to the bottom of the ski. Beautiful spray of action, which is telling the story of the speed that's being used as he hits this corner. And these are the types of things that, again, our manufacturers and our riders are looking for content. So next thing I want to go into, I guess, part 2 of this is actually preparing for some of these moments. And you know, aside from all the technical components of taking a good image, you really have to be able to be present in all these moments to troubleshoot. A lot like our poor team here has been doing, right? You're on the fly and you're responding to different situations all the time. But that is what it's all about. So to be prepared, you really need to know your subject. And I mean, the more intimately you know what you're photographing, the better your images are going to be. So if that happens to be a particular sport, then you need to be a student of that sport. You need to understand what the down parts are, the downsides, where the risks are, where the excitement is, what it takes to get to where these guys are. You know, a lot of these athletes spend their entire lives training for one moment. When you take that picture of them coming across a finish line or with their head dropped in disappointment, have you told that story, or did you just fire off another frame, right? You need to really understand to express and tell the stories. And the same with your wildlife. Wildlife is going to tell you how to photograph it. Now, obviously, I haven't done wildlife for a long time. I was much smarter than trying to learn all by myself. I teamed up with my gal pals out in Cochrane, and Joanne, who's out of the three of us, is the expert when it comes to wildlife, in particular birds. So using her expertise and working together as a team, you start to recognize similar traits from one species to another in how they're going to react and when they're going to move. And that preparedness allows you to make those decisions. You know, if the eagle's in the tree and you see them kind of shift and, you know, it's time to go to the bathroom, chances are they're going to come off that branch. So are you going to keep shooting that eagle in the tree and get another 300 images, or are you going to set it up for that moment when he takes off and you know you're going to need higher shutter speed? So you make a choice, a conscious decision once you've got one thing out of the way to go for the next. So anticipating the movement and the direction and the outcome is all part of what we have to do behind the lens. You know, in certain frames, like this particular one, we were combating setting sun actually on the left-hand side of the screen. So trying to work with minimizing blowouts, and there was a lot of distractions in the background as well in this particular image that we really didn't want to take away from someone taking in this moment. And on top of that, my lovely producer, Rupert was running around filming me taking photographs. So a lot of distractions going on, and you really have to keep your wits about you to be able to figure out the best shutter speeds and the best ISO settings and aperture settings to capture those images. But understanding how a bike's going to come into a corner, knowing how the dirt is going to spray, I was able to talk to our athlete, T in this case, and say, hey, this is what I need you to do. You need to charge this berm hard. I know it's going to screw up your exit. I don't care about your exit. I need the dirt exploding. And that's exactly what he did. So knowing the bike, knowing the athlete, all of those things gave us the image that we needed. So these are the types of things you want to try and keep prepared with. Owls. Owls are a great thing to go out and work with in wildlife because they're not fast moving 95% of the time. They sit there with that slow head rotation, sometimes looking down, but for the most part, if you can spot them, they're going to be pretty still targets for you. So you're going to get your shots of your owl, and then you're going to watch for that body language again. You know, they're one that kind of does a big, you know, they crouch down and then they burst up. So things like making sure you've got enough room in the frame that you're going to get all the wings, because the first 10 owl shots you shoot, you will probably chop the wings off if they're in flight. That's usually what happens. So you learn the hard way not to do that, and you learn to anticipate that motion. So when he was sitting on a fence, I didn't need much for shutter speed at all. I was sitting at about I think it was 1/250th of a second or 1/320th. And as soon as I started to see that little shift and he locked down on something below him, cranked it up to the 1250 is what it ended up being. And of course I recognized I had to go with a higher ISO in order to get the shot, but I got the motion. And that was what's most important to me, is making sure the motion is crisp. I can bring shadows up with post-processing without any issue at all, but taking a soft image and making it sharp, that's a much more challenging prospect. So
and just to refresh, so we had a question in the emails actually from Mark, just as we were losing you, things were going down. You were talking about typical wildlife and action shutter speeds. So you just kind of touched on that, but could you maybe give some more examples of certain scenarios of where you would use a faster shutter speed and what kind of range you'd be looking at?
Yeah, so usually with wildlife, I kind of have a fundamental target of trying to get into that 1/1000th of a second. For most activity, I'm going to be able to catch the movement. If I'm trying to photograph a little bluebird, not a chance that's going to work. We need to be upwards of 1/3200th or 1/4000th of a second to catch. I think the smaller the animals, usually the faster they are. But if if you can get used to working within that 1000 to 1600 range, there's not a lot of wildlife you won't catch that'll be really sharp. So that's a great place to start, I think, for most of the subject matter out there. Again, if it's just sitting and it's not doing anything, or it's just lumbering along really slow, you don't need to go anywhere near that fast, but you have to have the wits about you to make the adjustment if something all of a sudden happens. So know your own limitations too. If you're going to get lost in that moment, if you're watching a bear come towards you and all of a sudden it runs after something, will it be a reaction to immediately increase your shutter speed? Or are you going to be so into that moment that you're going to miss it and just end up with a whole bunch of big blurry furry pictures? So if that's the case, then set it higher and be prepared for it. That's the shot you're going for. So next thing, as far as being prepared, so troubleshooting the environment. You can't always do this with wildlife, but you can almost always do this with sports. So whenever I'm going into an event that I've got to photograph, and it doesn't matter if it's a rodeo, if it's mountain biking, if it's canoeing, skiing, whatever it is, the first thing I'm going to do is evaluate all the lines of sight. I'm going to look at what's happening with my daylight supply. I'm going to look at where the action is. I'm going to try and get myself into position and come up with plan A's and plan B's depending on what's going on. You got to keep in mind, especially if these are outdoor events, your canvas is constantly changing. You're going to have clouds rolling in, you're going to have winds picking up, you're going to have the sun moving across the sky. So things never stay the same. You've got to be able to constantly react and respond. So you will fail many times before things start to fall into place and make sense and come out the way you want them to. But that's okay, as long as you're learning and you're trying and you're figuring out. And that's what I think the biggest value of having the mirrorless is that it teaches you, because you can visualize what's going on. It's not just a thought process anymore. You get to see the answer. So that's a big help for people that want to get off of the automatic setting on their cameras, or even some of the shutter priority settings, and really start to understand the manual. This is what's going to help you get there, in my opinion, a lot quicker. So again, this particular image now, I had my camera set for 1/1000th of a second, shooting in a different direction. We were moving while this was happening, and he actually had his back to us the whole time. So thought process has to kick in again. He's sitting there and he kind of looked a little to the left, kind of looked a little to the right, and I thought, man, if he turns around, he just looks like some guy sitting in a natural bath somewhere, chilling out. I thought, man, if he turned all the way around and you could actually just see water dripping, that would be amazing. And then I start to think, okay, what do I have to be for shutter speed? Because at 1/1000th, again, it was dark at an ISO of 6400. So I'd had to go all the way up to 12.8. And I didn't really want to because it wasn't fast action. So conscious decision tells me, yeah, I can come back down to 1/400 shutter speed. The fastest moving thing will be the drips of water. So that's all I need to stop that and catch everything else that I want in this image. And then he was very, very sweet and kind enough to turn perfectly sideways and then have that wonderful drop of water coming from his little beard. So again, conscious decisions allow us to make changes on the fly. So yeah, I was set at the 1/1000th, but because of the lighting, I was able to crank it back to 1/400th and still get the image that I wanted. Did you have any other questions?
Yeah, so we have some more questions here for sure. Are you mostly these days using RF lenses, or are you also using some of your older EF lenses as well? This is from Susan Moss, and she says she has an R6 with an RF 600 f11 lens. Great lens for wildlife, but the light can be challenging at times with a lens like that.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I do have both. I have a 100-500 and a 70-200 RF series lens. But I do still use my 24-70, my 16-35, which are EF lenses, and I use the converter on it. And unfortunately, I do not have my own 600mm camera lens kicking around. But with the Canon Professional Services membership, it's an option to rent a big boy like that. And typically, if I'm going on a big excursion and I'm investing a lot of money to travel and see my wildlife, that's the camera lens I will order up. I will rent the lens and I will use my little converter. And honestly, I have had the luxury of shooting with the RF 600 prime as well as the EF 600. And there's very little fall off in performance with the EF, other than it's even longer because you've got that conversion piece on there. But I find that the technology is just superior right now to put an EF lens onto an RF body. So don't be afraid to do that. And then if and when you're able to upgrade your lenses too, you've got that option. You don't have to do it all at once. You can kind of baby step through it. So, and yeah, with the f11 lens, you need, again, this is understanding your equipment, and it sounds like you've already figured this out, but that is going to be a bright light shooting lens. You're not going to be able to go out, at dusk and get the perfect shot. You're going to need something like an f4, you're going to have to work harder because of that depth of field to keep your backgrounds really clean and simple so that they don't take away from your subject matter. But at a fraction of the price, at least you get to a sense of what it is to shoot at that focal length. And that's just a great option for people.
Absolutely. Let's do one more lens question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This was from a little bit earlier from Deborah Sharp, asking if you're a member of the Cochrane Camera Club, and also if you shoot much with the 100 to 500 millimeter lens with the R5.
Okay. Yes and yes. Absolutely, I am a member of the Cochrane Camera Club. Cannot say enough about it. It's a club that's really been carefully crafted to create a really safe environment for photographers. They don't focus on a lot of competition. It's really about camaraderie and helping one another, lifting each other up, and learning. Both the girlfriends that I photograph with on a regular basis, I met through that camera club. So I can't recommend more strongly than this, but you need to find your people. You will enjoy everything about photography that much more if you've got someone you can literally sit for days on end and talk ISO and aperture and not watch their eyes roll into the back of their head because they can't listen to anymore. When you've got those like-minded people around you, it just elevates the whole experience. Everything is better. Everything is more memorable and a lot more special. So yeah, shout out to all my Cochrane Camera Club people.
Fantastic. And yeah, we'll get to more questions a little bit later if you want to keep going.
Perfect. Okay. So again, talking about anticipating those moments. So photographing for the Amsoil Snowcross series down in the US, unbelievably cold conditions. And you've got to be prepared for that. You know, Aspen, I think we're at a 12,000 feet above sea level. The entire track is on a hill, so you're running up and down with literally no oxygen in your lungs, and you really have to work at maximizing every opportunity and having things with you and being prepared. So same with this Snowcross series. This shot was something that they were really happy with because it had their logo on one side of the leading rider, Snowcross on the right side, because again, it's not a well-known event yet, and you still see the ferocity of the moment with people charging, but what you don't normally get to see is them coming right at you. So if I had someone photographing me right now when I had taken this shot, it would be quite entertaining because I was hiking up a rather vertical berm on the outside of what is a corner at the end of this high-speed rocker section. I'd have to climb all the way up to the top of it, get on top, fire off my shots, run back down, because if there's going to be a crash, they're probably going to come flying right over the berm. And it's important that I'm not distracting or in the way of an athlete or any of the people working the track. So when you go into shooting any type of a sport, it is imperative that you take that responsibility on your shoulders to understand, again, where the safe places are to be, to know when you need to get out of those places, if they're not going to be safe at any point in time, respecting the athlete's safety as well as the people working there, volunteering there. And if you don't know, make sure you're with someone that does. Don't take those chances. You won't get a second one. So back to preparing for the moment. Number 3, get those camera settings in line. So if you take the things you learn from point 1 and 2, knowing your subject and then understanding the environment, before you even step on the dirt or onto the snow or into the Zodiac, have your camera ready. It's just one less thing you have to contend with when you're going out. So some of those settings, and I'll go back through right now and just pop them up there. There we go. These are some of the things that I think are really important for this type of photography. So your focus mode, AI Servo for Canon. AI is artificial intelligence if you're not aware. And what this does is this is your continuous focusing. So as your subject's moving, your camera is constantly adjusting that focus. You need to have that because things happen quickly in these scenarios. Your focus point, for myself, I like the spot, single spot focus. But whether you use crosshairs or something else, if you do that double back button, you're going to have to set that one up to your comfort level if you want the crosshairs or the single spot. And then your shutter speed. This is the most important element of action photography. So you're looking at 1/1000th of a second sort of as a baseline. Again, we talked about that. 1/1600 is kind of my target for any type of sports action. And aperture you can come way down on typically. So again, understanding the environment, if you've done your job and you walked around and realized, wow, there's signage everywhere and there's all sorts of distractions and people in the background and there's no place I can go and not have to deal with that, then a lower aperture, coming in at that nice 2.8 wide aperture, you're going to be able to blur out a lot of those, soften that distraction, and really focus and target in on your athlete or your subject. You just have to understand the depth of what you're trying to photograph. So if you happen to have people that are layered, obviously at 2.8 you're going to get one person in focus and then a blur next to them. So you're going to have to make those decisions on the fly again. And exposure, always as low as possible. The less noise you can have in an image to contend with, the better. Just make sure that priority is always on the shutter speed. So here, great example. It's just, I brought this image in just because the technical components of it were unbelievably challenging. The sun is coming in from behind the cowboy. The field, as you can see, is rather wet. So a lot of light reflection, a lot of blown out highlights across the entire plane. This particular contestant is running towards you, so you also are putting the camera into a very stressful position of targeting movement that is not coming across the frame but into the frame at a high speed. So very difficult for it to lock in on what to do. With the spray that was coming up with all this, when the horse is trying to slam on the brakes because the rope has gone out, that huge spray of mud takes any type of autofocus right out of your control. It's trying to figure out what the heck do you want me to do. So here's where you've got to go back into that back button option and you've got to force it, take the wheel, force it to go where you want it to. For me, it was on the cowboy, and I didn't want to go with an aperture above the 7.1 because there is so much distraction in the background. Even though that calf is a little bit soft, I just loved the leading line coming back into the cowboy. That's where the action was. That was the main focus for us. And having that enough detail that it wasn't too dark, it wasn't blown out. A lot of things going on at one time to contend with. So, you're going to probably fire off, I'm guaranteeing you the first couple shots from this session were not shots I was going to share tonight. They probably got deleted a long time ago. And that's going to happen, but you need to be able to respond. So as long as you can do that, you're going to be all right out there. So number 4, my favorite, anticipate the chaos. I love the chaos in what we do. I think for me that element of never knowing what's coming for sure is one of the things that really has a lot of sex appeal. It's just so alluring to be out of control, and it's your job to get it back in control. So again, knowing your athletes, knowing your sports, knowing when those moments are going to happen, that all falls on you. But if you can get prepared with all the other elements, like the conditions and the settings, you're going to be able to start watching for that. You'll have the room and the capacity to really engage in the sport or in the behavior and get yourself ahead of the action. And as soon as you do that, you're ready. You're going to start picking up those moments. It won't be something that happened and you go, oh, that was cool, I missed it. Nobody likes to go through that. And I decided to throw this in there because I know this was a big thing for myself, and even, some of the newer photographers. I've got a niece that's just getting started in photography. Really proud of her, and it's out of her comfort zone, but trying to stress about getting that base shot. So, you know, if you've never been out, let's say, and you've never photographed bears before, and you show up and you're with friends and you've got a guide and you see your first bear, you're gonna burn through your card quick. You know, he might be sitting in a field all by himself in the grass, and all of a sudden you've got 273 shots of that bear moving this much. But you were excited, it was fun, and you got it out of your system. If you can start to push yourself to get those 1 or 2 shots, not the hundreds, get those couple of shots. Now it's off your table. Now you can be the photographer. Now you need to look at the other things around you. Can you frame it differently? If they turn to the left, do I want to leave more negative space so it looks like they're looking into the distance and there's a story all of a sudden? Do I want to zoom back in and get some details? Now zoom back out and put context back into the image. You give yourself all these options, and from one moment of sitting with one animal in one location, you can end up with a huge variety of images you could use for months on end, and people think they're all different images. But it's important as a photographer to be able to do that, because sometimes you don't even see some of those opportunities till you just start trying things. So if you're someone, and this is a personal thing, if you're someone that gets back home and you download all your images, and it's one after the other of the same thing every time, this is for you. This is your own challenge to yourself. Get those couple pictures out of the way next time, and then move. Look around, get down low, try a different perspective, zoom in tighter, leave more room. Have fun with it. Think about yourself having a model at your disposal, and it's up to you to tell the story. Those will start to create some really interesting habits and some new creative flair in how you come up with your decisions on what you want to do when you're out there with the camera. Number 6, probably one of the most important. I'm gonna say it again. Enjoy the journey. Find your people. You know, it is such a privilege to be able to pick up a camera. It's really life altering. You get a glimpse into a moment, whether it's a competitor, whether it's an animal, something that most of the world will never get to see. And it's up to you to bring that back for everyone else, to tell that story, to let them see that glimpse into what you got to experience. And it's really rewarding when you get those images. But if you get those images with other people, with friends that were there, that had that same experience, it becomes something that's not just a check mark, it's a lifelong memory. And I cannot stress the value of that enough. It's going to make things a lot more fun. So for me, that is it on the images, and hopefully we'll have some time to go in. I didn't bring up anything about the R3 experience that we had, obviously, but I know we have some time that we can go into that. Just want to, again, a huge thank you to Evelyn, Camera Store, Jeff, my guy here at the Camera Store, the team that somehow managed to work miracle and get us up and running again, and of course Canon Canada for their support, Russell and all the crew back out east. It's just been such an amazing year and so much to be thankful for.
Well, I hope, we can stick around, maybe answer a few more questions from the chat. And then you did mention the EOS R3, and I did want to touch a little bit on your experience with that. So this is Canon's latest mirrorless camera. It is designed to be an action and sports camera. And so when you had your chance to have that in your hands, how important was it to you to have that new autofocus system, and how has that changed your action photography?
The new autofocus system, I mean, I loved what the R5 was offering already, and when I heard about some of the elements that the new R3 was going to have on it, we did a quick online session, a tech session with Canon Canada before the camera came out. We took about an hour going through all the features, and that's kind of when I realized that, man, I'm going to be on my own with this. Like there's no Google, there's no manual, there's nothing. I've got to I've got to be on game here. And it was actually really nerve-wracking at first to think I had to figure a lot of this technology out on my own, but it just works so well. And having shot with the 1DX Mark II for quite a while, it was actually felt like going back to your old stomping grounds. It was a very familiar fit and style to the 1DX. And it's quite surprising how fast we can adapt to different styles of photography. The eye tracking on it was phenomenal. It was really hard to give that camera back. I'll be honest with you, and I think I was one of the first ones to have my name on the list for a new one coming out. The capabilities for the style of photography that I do, I honestly have no idea how they're going to make it better than what it is, than what I got to shoot with. Its tracking ability in low light, in bright light, coming towards, going away, busy backgrounds, it didn't matter. Everything I threw at it. No rolling shutter distortion. I mean, it was just one image after the other. I got to pick and choose anything I wanted, so that was really exciting.
Awesome. Now here's a tough question though. So if you're shooting between the R5 and the R3, there's sort of some pros and cons to each one. So with the R5, for example, you have a lot more resolution to work with. So when you're talking about wildlife photography, how important is having that extra cropping room for you, you know, depending on what lenses you're able to bring out with you?
So I guess just depending on where you're going to be going and the type of wildlife that you're going to be photographing. I mean, I look back to some of the earlier days of you know, the photography that I was doing, and I was still really impressed with an 18 megapixel sensor. A lot of those images caught spectacular action, had no struggles at all with the end result on clarity and detail. We get pretty spoiled now with the 45 megapixels for sure, but at the same token, you know, if I'm doing photojournalistic work, there's a downside to having 45 megapixels. It's a much bigger file to work with, and to be honest with you, I've got to get it uploaded and out. I mean, a lot of times it's still happening when I'm on the side of a mountain, you know, in between skiers or out on the snow bike course. I mean, you're out there with a mobile phone trying to get these things uploaded right off the camera. So having the smaller file sizes to work with is not a bad thing. It's still a tremendous amount of detail. If you're using the longer lenses, a lot of times you're not cropping in at all. So you've got everything that you need. If you were out there shooting with the 70-200 wildlife and it's, you know, hundreds of yards away, for sure you're going to have to zoom in, and that megapixel count is going to be pretty important. So it's just knowing, getting the right lens with the right camera body, getting the best you can for what you can afford.
Awesome. All right, we'll have a few more questions from the chat here.
Okay.
One here from Connor. When shooting at higher ISOs, how much noise reduction in post do you use? And if so, how do you go about determining when there's too much noise?
So yes, I will use post, and I will use as much as I possibly can without distorting any of the sharpness of the image. Typically it doesn't require masking, but I do have my favorite software programs that I rely on for noise reduction. You know, again, as long as the image is sharp, people will deal with noise reduction or with the noise in the image, but the reduction just makes the details that much crisper and cleaner. So if you've got the means to do it, it's a pretty quick fix. These new AI technologies are incredible, how well they pick out in detail which parts need to be smoothened out. So I'm a firm believer that using that technology should be done if it's going to get you the better image in the end. Sorry, and what was the other part to that?
I think I lost it. Oh, how do you determine if there's too much noise?
Oh.
How does it look, I guess?
Yeah, just, you know what, don't be afraid of zooming in. A lot of the editing that I do, I'll actually do my final scope at 200%. Nobody else is ever going to look at it at 200%. But if it's clean at that mark, I know I can put that thing on print the size of a wall and the client's going to be happy with it. So you can use that as a gauge, but just you'll get used to it. And if you're printing, that's going to be a little bit different again than posting on media. Like Instagram is so small.
Yeah.
You don't need high resolution. We joke all the time when we're out photographing. It's like, ooh, yeah, nailed it. Instagram post. Didn't work maybe for a full print, but definitely going to be good enough for Instagram.
For Instagram. We have a question here from Kay Cornell asking, what do you use to protect your gear when you're shooting in the elements, in the rain, things like that?
Yes, great questions. So I've got a rain cover that I used. It's an old rain cover from, I don't even know what the brand name is, from years and years ago, that I used to use, and I haven't had to use it very often, in all honesty. One of the nice things about the 1DX and the L series glass is that everything is weather sealed. So obviously going out in a torrential downpour I wouldn't recommend, but if I'm out there and it starts to snow a little bit, I'm never worried about how the lens or how the camera body is going to react. The last trip that we did, I actually had lens coat is the gear that I used, especially on the 600 and the R5. Had both well sealed. It performed perfectly, and it is sure a good thing I had it, because yeah, it's called a rainforest for a reason. It really rained a lot.
Awesome. Another question just about wildlife guides. Do you have any recommendations that you can share of some people to look for, or different tours that people can maybe check out?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it depends on kind of your hot buttons, but you know, we had an incredible expedition when we were up in Churchill a couple of years ago. We went up there to photograph polar bears, and we had worked with Alex, who owns Discovery Churchill, and he put on a phenomenal tour for us, and we actually got in touch with him through Zach Mills. And Zach is another photographer out of Canmore who is just sort of in the process of setting up a bunch of different outlets for tours, everything from Africa to Churchill. He was out photographing spirit bears not too long ago as well, out in BC coast. So he's very environmental conscious, conservation driven photographer, just a really wonderful person, and some of his contacts have been people that, you know, we've been able to go out and photograph with and use the expertise of, and I've always been so impressed and so thankful. BC Coast, Outer Shores, a huge shout out to Russell and his group. Just an incredible experience to be out there, and someone that was just so invested in not only First Nations but the wildlife that was out there, conservation efforts, a lot of time talking about what the journey was and where they're wanting to go with things and what the challenges are. So it feels good as a photographer not to just snap off some images, but really be connected to where you're going. And yeah, I probably have a few more too, so if there's any questions, again, I'll throw email in the chat and you can just let me know, and I'm happy to share the ones that I would recommend.
Sounds good. Last question from the audience was, what is some of your bucket list locations of where you'd want to shoot wildlife next?
You know what, I would say for sure Africa is on my list, and poor Zach is going to be getting a call about that, there's no doubt. It's, you know, you just don't know what you don't know, and that's where having a community of photographers is so important. You know, there's some really good local resources as well that you can photograph some incredible wildlife, and in the last year, just meeting up with Joe Desjardins, for example, you know, meeting with Don Kessler, aka Bear Whisperer, you start to learn, even with some of these local guys, like they're just so well connected and so knowledgeable, and they're willing to share everything. They're just phenomenal that way. So teaming up with them, you're going to learn the places to go and the guides to be around, and you're going to enjoy, you're going to have the room to enjoy what you're doing when you're doing it, and not watching your back trying to figure out if you're where you should be. Yeah, case in point, up in Churchill, we were with our group and we watched father and son who had stopped on the main road and started walking across the rocks towards the sea, towards the Hudson Bay, pardon me, and I mean, our guides were really getting worked up. They were really nervous about it, and you know, one of them finally hopped in the car and took off, and they were on radios, and their concern is that these guys don't realize that between all these little rock crevices, the polar bears will nest in there to rest and get out of the wind, and you would be up on top of them before you'd ever know that they were there. And there's nowhere you're going to go if you're not going to be safe. So yeah, you got to be with people. So trust in referrals and really look at the guides. There are some amazing people out there that really care about the environments, that care about the animals. Those are the people you go with.
Fantastic. Well, I can't thank you enough, Jackie, for joining us tonight for this presentation. Of course, for all of your patience and everybody who participated. Of course, we want to thank Canon Canada as well for sponsoring this TCSTV Live. And remember that if you did register for this event, we'll send you an email with some offers from Canon Canada, which is, again, thanks for having all of you guys join us. And if you didn't register, you can still take advantage of those Canadian offers by emailing me at evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and we'll make sure that you get on the list for that. I also just wanted to make a special note that we have a lot more TCSTV live events coming up soon. So do subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to get in on that, or always head over to thecamerastore.com under the events tab to see what we have coming up next. So thanks again, Jackie, and we hope that everyone has a wonderful evening. Take care.